Republicans continue to exploit the humanitarian crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border, and now it could even result in a government shutdown. This week, Speaker Mike Johnson led 60 House Republicans to the border in Texas to grandstand and spew a toxic slew of lies, including that President Biden is all about open borders. Republicans, so committed to scoring political points on this issue, they insist on blocking more funding for Ukraine and Israel and for the government in general. Despite positive talk of a potential breakthrough ahead of the first funding deadline on January 19th, the border visit stunt left far-right members digging their heels in on radical policy changes that would do anything but help. California Congresswoman Sara also visited the border in San Diego this week, posting on social media that her visit underscores why Congress needs to pass President Biden's border request. Congresswoman Jacobs joins me now. She is a member of the House Foreign Affairs and Armed Services Committee. Representative, good to see you. First, tell us about what it is you saw, what it is you heard from officials during your border visit this week.
Yeah, well, unlike the many Republican members of Congress who flew to Texas, I actually live in a border community and represent a border community and regularly go and visit the border to make sure I understand what's happening at all times in our community. And what I saw is that it's very clear that we need to address the backlog of asylum cases with more immigration judges, more asylum case officers, and that we need to make sure that we provide more legal pathways so that people have more legal options to get into the United States, and so that it's not overburdening the asylum system. You know, even Border Patrol will agree that they aren't the ones who should be doing asylum cases, and yet right now that's the system that we have because we don't have enough non-Border Patrol in place to be able to address that, whether it's at the ports of entry or at, with the case officers and with the immigration judges. You know, the other thing that I heard once again that I hear every time I'm at the border is how distinct the asylum issue is from the issue of narcotics and particularly fentanyl from coming across the border. I know that's something my Republican colleagues like to talk about a lot, but the fact of the matter is it is U.S. citizens who are bringing narcotics and fentanyl across the border. It is not the population who is coming to seek asylum. And so a lot of what the Republicans are proposing right now, like getting rid of the asylum process or making it much harder to actually be able to qualify for asylum, I heard from Border Patrol and Customs and Border CBP that wouldn't help them address the situation at the border at all. And in fact, Border Patrol, CBP, we all agree that what we need is comprehensive immigration reform and to create more legal pathways.
Right. We often talk about how it is cruel. What we fail to mention is how it's also ineffective. As mentioned, right-wing lawmakers, they're using Speaker Johnson's trip to the border to threaten to shut down the government if President Biden doesn't agree to, quote, tougher border laws, which is, again, an oversimplification of what is happening at the border. When it comes to this question about funding the government, how do you see this playing out? Can a shutdown be averted?
I mean, it's absolutely absurd that in the name of so-called protecting our border, they want to shut down our government and have probably around 3/4 of DHS officers not being able to work, which is only going to make it less orderly and less humane at the border. And so I'm hopeful that Speaker Johnson will come to the table and actually have a real conversation. You know, Senate Democrats, Senate Republicans, and House Democrats are all in those conversations. And as a representative of a border community, I've really been pushing to make sure that those negotiations really focus on safe and humane and fair ways we can address the issues at the border. But at the moment, House Republicans refuse to even come to the table, and it's really, really disappointing.
Representative Jacobs, before we go today, of course, 3 years since the January 6th insurrection, you posted in part, quote, I was trapped in the House gallery during my first week in office when insurrectionists stormed the U.S. Capitol. 3 years later, MAGA Republicans continue to downplay how close we came to losing our democracy. First, how is that day still impacting your life now? More broadly, how does it continue to impact our democracy?
No, it was an incredibly traumatic day, both for myself personally, as a member of Congress who was trapped in the gallery and had to escape with barely 30 seconds until the insurrectionists got to where we were running, and for our democracy. I worked at the State Department and the UN. I've worked in a lot of post-conflict areas. I know how tricky political violence can be. And this is the first time I really came this close to thinking that it might be the end for me. And so I'll be honest, I still sometimes don't like fireworks and big crowds as a result. But even more importantly, I think it is incredibly important that we hold people accountable who not only engaged in this violence, but also who incited and encouraged it. Because I've seen in my work in post-conflict areas that if you don't have that accountability, you're more likely to get future instances of political violence, and even more scary, you're more likely to see them use the actual institutions and systems of power itself, which is much harder to combat. And I think we're already seeing that.
And that global context is critical in this moment. California Congresswoman Sara, as always, thank you. Next.